Dolly Parton spent 40 years laughing off the same question, and then one day, without any announcement, she simply stopped laughing. She sat in her Tennessee home across from a journalist, and when the conversation turned to Kenny Rogers, she paused in a way she had never paused before in any interview across 4 decades of being asked. Then she said there were things she had never shared with the world, things she simply had not been ready to speak aloud until now. At 78 years old, with Kenny gone and no particular reason left to be careful with her words, she let the truth come out. What followed was not the confession of a secret romance. It was something more difficult to name and, in the end, far more moving than any scandal could have been. It was an honest account of what it means to love someone for over 40 years without needing that love to be anything other than exactly what it is. Dolly Parton and Kenny Rogers rank among the most recognized figures country music has ever produced, and their names became permanently linked through recordings that shaped the sound of American music across multiple decades. But the music, as celebrated as it remains today, was never really the core of what they shared. Understanding that requires going back to Nashville in the 1970s, where their first meeting left no particular impression on either of them. Rogers appeared on Parton's television show, Dolly, and the two exchanged the kind of polite, professional interaction that working musicians have with one another all the time. Both were building solo careers that would eventually carry them to the top of every major chart, but nothing about that first encounter suggested they were about to become one of the closest and longest friendships the entertainment world had ever witnessed. What changed everything happened in 1983, inside a recording studio, and it came very close to not happening at all. Barry Gibb, a member of the Bee Gees and one of the most accomplished songwriters working in popular music at the time, had written a song he felt needed two voices to carry it properly. His original plan was a solo record for Kenny Rogers. Kenny worked on it, recorded it, and then told Gibb something that required a real kind of honesty. He no longer believed in the song. That admission could have ended the conversation entirely. Instead, Gibb proposed turning the track into a duet, and the name he put forward was Dolly Parton. By chance or by fortune, she was already in the same building that day. Kenny admitted years later that the suggestion made him genuinely nervous. Parton carried a reputation that preceded her into every room she entered, and their paths had not meaningfully crossed since that early television appearance. But she walked into the studio, heard the recording, and agreed to sing without hesitation. They began working through the vocals together, and what emerged was Islands in the Stream. Released in 1983, the song reached #1 on the Billboard Hot 100 and topped both the country and adult contemporary charts simultaneously, becoming one of the best-selling duets in the history of recorded music. Kenny said more than once in later years that it ranked among his favorite songs he ever made. But what listeners and live audiences noticed, beyond the chart positions and the sales numbers, was the chemistry running underneath every line they sang. When they performed the song live, there was something visible between them that no amount of rehearsal could have manufactured, a warmth and ease that audiences recognized from the very first concert and never stopped talking about. Out of that one recording session grew a musical partnership that spanned decades and produced some of the most recognized recordings in country music history. In 1984, they released Once Upon a Christmas, a holiday album that sold millions of copies worldwide and was accompanied by a television special called Kenny and Dolly, A Christmas to Remember, which aired in December of that year and drew audiences who kept returning to it every season. Real Love followed in 1985, debuting at #1 on the country charts and launching the Real Love Tour across the United States to sold-out crowds who wanted to see this partnership performed in person. Love is Strange arrived in 1990, and through the decade that followed, they continued appearing together at concerts and major events, even during stretches when no new music was being recorded between them. Their 2005 performance of Islands in the Stream at Country Music Television's 100 Greatest Duets concert produced the same electric response from the crowd that the song had first generated more than 20 years earlier, which said something significant about both the music and the people delivering it. The final duet they made together came in 2013. You Can't Make Old Friends was built around the experience of growing older alongside someone whose presence has become as familiar as your own habits, the specific understanding that only comes from decades of shared history. While recording it, Dolly pulled Kenny close and told him she could never stand at his funeral and sing. The studio went quiet in a way that everyone present remembered. Kenny carried that moment with him for the rest of his life, bringing it up in interviews as one of the clearest expressions of what their friendship had grown into. The song earned a Grammy Award nomination for Best Country Duo and Group Performance, which felt like exactly the right recognition for music that was openly about the very thing their relationship embodied. Kenny's farewell from touring arrived in 2017, and his final concert, All In for the Gambler, brought together many of the artists who had shared stages and years with him. Dolly came and they performed Islands in the Stream and You Can't Make Old Friends Together one final time in front of an audience. Neither of them made it through the set without tears. 4 decades of trust and music and consistently showing up for each other were audible in every measure, and everyone present understood they were watching something unrepeatable come to a close. The speculation about what lay beneath their friendship had followed them from nearly the beginning. Fans noticed the physical ease between them on stage, the way a hand would linger, the way Kenny's attention tracked Dolly's every movement, the teasing edge that ran through every interview they gave sitting side by side. Kenny once told an audience, positioned close beside her, that he had spent years trying to make her fall in love with him, and she had always refused, and the whole room laughed, but the underlying question never dissolved. Dolly had been married to Carl Dean since 1966, but Dean remained almost entirely absent from her public life, which fed the idea that there was space in her world for something the public wasn't being told about. Kenny's 5 marriages, each of them ending, made people wonder whether Dolly was the one steady relationship in his life that had somehow managed to hold across everything. What both of them said in response, across decades of being asked in every kind of interview and setting, was entirely consistent. Dolly described what they shared as something close to a sibling bond, built on genuine love that had never needed to cross into romance to feel complete or meaningful. Kenny said the value he placed on the friendship had always outweighed any other consideration, and that the presence of other relationships in both their lives had made the choice easier to maintain. He credited that decision directly for the length and stability of what they shared, and he made the contrast with his romantic relationships explicit more than once. Kenny Rogers passed away on March 20, 2020, at the age of 81, at his home in Sandy Springs, Georgia, under hospice care with his family surrounding him. A recording career stretching nearly 6 decades had produced more than 100 million records sold worldwide, with his music moving freely across rock and roll, folk, and country in ways that kept bringing new audiences to each genre. The announcement came in the early hours of March 21st, and tributes arrived quickly from across the music world. Dolly's response is the one people remember longest. She sat at her piano that morning, recorded a video, and shared it before the news had fully settled. Her voice broke almost immediately. She said she had loved Kenny with all her heart and that her heart was broken. Then she gathered herself and said she knew he was somewhere better, which didn't make missing him down here any easier to carry. A tribute concert held in April 2021 brought her back to perform Sweet Music Man in his memory, where she described him as a legend whose music would continue mattering long after all of them were gone. She still mentions him in interviews. She still posts about him on the dates that mattered between them. Singing Islands in the Stream, she has said, brings her a sense of his presence, and she believes the recordings they made together carry something of him forward that ordinary time cannot reach. The interview at her Tennessee home was the moment she finally addressed 40 years of speculation directly, without deflecting into a joke or a practiced smile. She acknowledged that during performances together, there had been moments when she looked at Kenny and recognized something that felt like more than professional admiration. But she was clear about what mattered and what she had chosen. Their friendship was worth more than any alternative she could have reached for. 4 decades of genuine closeness, built deliberately and protected consistently, was the relationship she chose every time she chose not to change it. And looking back across all of it, she said she had never once regretted that choice. Country music has produced celebrated partnerships before and since, but the one between Dolly Parton and Kenny Rogers occupies a place in the history of American music that nothing else quite duplicates. The Billboard chart records, the Grammy nominations, the Christmas albums, the farewell tours, all of it belongs to the story. But what gives the story its lasting weight is simpler than any of that. 2 people who first met in Nashville found something real between them, recognized it for what it was, and spent more than 40 years making sure it survived.